She only wanted to board her flight, nothing more. But as soon as she spoke, the laughter started. Sharp, cruel, echoing through the terminal. An airport agent mocked her accent, twisting her words into a public joke while strangers turned to stare, some smirking, some silent. Her heart raced, humiliation burning through her chest like fire. And yet, beneath the fear, something stronger stirred, a quiet fury, a spark that refused to be broken. How do you confront a world that treats your very voice as a weapon against you? And when power meets prejudice, who will truly win in the end? And what happens next will shock you. But before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this video. Before that morning at the airport, her life seemed ordinary, quiet, purposeful, and full of dreams. Every day began with the same ritual: coffee steaming in her favorite mug, a quick scroll through news headlines, and a glance at her calendar, filled with meetings, travel plans, and strategies for growing her travel group, a company she had built from scratch with years of sweat and sacrifice. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a daughter who called her mother every morning, a friend who remembered birthdays without fail, and a woman who carried the weight of ambition with grace. Her city apartment buzzed with life, her cat weaving between her legs as she paced through morning emails, the hum of traffic outside her window, and the chatter of neighbors greeting each other. She had learned early that the world wasn't always fair, but she met it with persistence, not bitterness. Her accent, the soft lilt of her heritage, had never been a problem in business. Clients admired her clarity, her poise, and her confidence. But subtle glances, occasional smirks, and whispered jokes had been the faintest reminders that not everyone saw her as equal. On this particular morning, she adjusted her blazer, double-checked her itinerary, and headed for the airport. Her mind was on meetings, deadlines, and the expansion plans she'd been nurturing for months. What she couldn't anticipate, what she didn't see coming, was that a simple journey, something millions did every day, would become the stage for ridicule, humiliation, and a confrontation with a prejudice so blunt it would shake the very foundation of her confidence. Even in the calm before the storm, there was a tension, a quiet warning in the air, like the first tremor before an earthquake. And when it hit, it would leave more than embarrassment. It would awaken a force within her that no mockery, no dismissal could ever contain. The moment she stepped into the airport terminal, the atmosphere shifted. People bustled past with luggage in hand, announcements echoing over the loudspeakers, but a chill ran down her spine the instant she approached the check-in counter. The agent behind the desk wasn't smiling. Her eyes flicked up and lingered just a fraction too long on her face, on the subtle cadence of her accent as she spoke. At first, it was a small, almost dismissible smirk, but then came the tilt of the head and the slow, mocking repetition of her words. "Excuse me, ma'am." "What did you just say?" the agent asked, voice dripping with amusement. What started as a flicker of discomfort became a blazing sense of humiliation. People nearby started to notice. Some tried to ignore it. Some laughed quietly, and others exchanged glances that made her stomach twist. Every syllable she spoke was dissected, distorted, and ridiculed. Her accent, a part of her identity, a reminder of her roots, was now treated as a weapon, twisted to draw attention and shame. She clenched her hands, her heart pounding, every second stretching like a taut rope. The gesture wasn't just casual rudeness. It was a deliberate display, a small act that exposed the casual cruelty that sometimes hid behind the polished veneer of daily life. And it didn't stop there. When she tried to explain her itinerary, the agent interrupted, questioning her plans, insinuating incompetence, and suggesting she had made errors in front of a growing crowd. Boarding passes shuffled, documents scanned, and rescanned, as though her very existence was being tested. Each delay, each scoff, Each whisper from behind the counter piled onto her mounting frustration. The experience was no longer a transaction. It was a performance in which she was the unwilling star, her dignity dangling by a thread. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the humiliation only intensified. Other staff members watched, some neutral, some quietly smirking. A fellow passenger muttered something under their breath, and the weight of every stare pressed down on her shoulders. It was in these moments, the twisting of words, the laughter that wasn't meant to be shared with her but at her, that the reality of systemic prejudice became tangible. The subtle barriers that had existed in the background of her life were now loud and visible, and there was no hiding from them. Then came the small, almost trivial acts that revealed the larger injustice. Her bags being rerouted unnecessarily, security checks lingering far longer than those of travelers around her, and the repeated questions about her credentials, her authority, and her very right to be there. Each act was minor on its own, almost ignorable, but strung together, they formed a net that trapped her in a moment of escalating tension. Her patience wore thin, yet she had to remain calm. One misstep could make the situation worse. Her mind raced, calculating, strategizing, and refusing to let fear fully consume her. This wasn't just about a single incident anymore. It was about standing against the quiet, insidious prejudice that threatened to reduce her achievements and identity to a punchline. And then, at the peak of her growing frustration, a sudden comment from the agent, a joke laced with venom and disdain, echoed loudly in the terminal. Heads turned, laughter erupted. Her chest tightened, she felt the sting of being mocked not as a person, but as a representative of everything they chose to underestimate. The world seemed to hold its breath for a moment, waiting to see her reaction. Would she crumble? Would she confront it? Would justice somehow reach across the terminal in that instant? That tension, the pull between humiliation and rising determination, was palpable, a cliffhanger in its purest form. And in that suspenseful pause, she realized something crucial. The issue wasn't just about this airport, this agent, or this moment. It was about the system, the countless microaggressions, and the persistent questioning of her worth simply because of who she was. She straightened her shoulders, her mind sharpening. Every insult, every smile, every whisper became fuel. The fire that had flickered quietly inside her during her morning routine now roared with intensity. The unfairness of the moment crystallized into resolve. The stakes shifted from personal embarrassment to reclaiming respect, asserting authority, and resisting diminishment. And as she braced herself for the confrontation that would soon escalate beyond the counter, the terminal seemed to pulse with anticipation, leaving everyone, herself included, poised on the edge of what was about to unfold. The moment that had been building, the tension, the whispers, the stifled laughter, erupted like a storm. The airport terminal, previously just a backdrop of indifferent travelers and fluorescent lights, became a stage for the confrontation she had dreaded, yet anticipated. The agent, still smirking, repeated her mocking comment, louder this time, as if daring the entire crowd to notice, and they did. Heads turned, cameras glimmered from phones held hesitantly in hands, and the collective pause of hundreds of onlookers hung in the air, almost tangible. Every eye seemed to weigh her, measure her, and in that suspended moment, she felt the weight of history pressing down. Not just this incident, but every slight, every judgment, every subtle dismissal she had ever endured. Her chest tightened. Anger surged, not the reckless kind, but the controlled, fiery kind that demands action. She straightened her back, her voice trembling with a raw edge of authority as she addressed the agent. Words that had been trapped, sharpened by years of polite deflection, poured out with precision. She spoke not only of the insult, but of the larger injustice, the casual cruelty, the systemic assumptions, and the subtle oppression that made her very existence a target. The crowd began to murmur, their collective awareness growing as the truth of the situation unfolded in real time. The agent's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat. But the tension was far from over. Staff members, who had been silent witnesses, shifted uneasily, sensing that the equilibrium they had maintained was breaking. A manager hurried over, attempting to intervene, but the momentum had shifted. She was no longer a passive target. She was a force demanding recognition. The agent met every question and challenge with calm precision, revealing the absurdity and cruelty of their behavior. The air was thick with anticipation, the emotional charge electric. Then, the pivotal moment arrived. With a calm but unwavering tone, she revealed her identity, not as an ordinary traveler, but as the founder and CEO of an 850-mailers travel group. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers turned to murmurs, and the agent's face drained of color. The laughter, so cruel moments ago, died in stunned silence. The eyes, previously filled with judgment, now widened in disbelief. In one instant, the scales had shifted. The humiliation she had endured became a mirror reflecting the agent's arrogance and ignorance. Her words flowed on, detailing the breadth of her work, her impact, and the millions of people her company served worldwide. The contrast between the triviality of the agent's mockery and the vastness of her accomplishments could not have been starker. The power of her words, delivered with a combination of dignity and righteous indignation, left no room for doubt. Every onlooker, from fellow travelers to airport staff, felt the weight of the injustice and the brilliance of her response, and yet beneath the triumph, there was still tension. She had exposed the cruelty, revealed the truth, and asserted her authority. But there was a cost. The terminal was alive with murmurs, some sympathetic, others still tinged with discomfort or disbelief. She knew that this confrontation would ripple far beyond this airport, into conversations, headlines, and social media. But in that charged moment, she felt the clarity of her own power. The humiliation that had once threatened to consume her had transformed into a catalyst, igniting not only her defiance, but also a broader awareness of prejudice and systemic injustice. As the confrontation reached its apex, she delivered the final, unyielding line, one that would linger long after. The terminal emptied. Mock me for my voice, my accent, my heritage, but know this. Every word you twisted, every laugh you shared, only fuels what I've already built. You don't diminish me. You reveal yourself. The air seemed to crack with the force of her declaration, leaving a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. The stage was set for the resolution. She had faced the peak of prejudice, turned humiliation into revelation, and carved a path through injustice with courage, intelligence, and poise. But what came next, the aftermath, the consequences, the impact on her life and those around her, was still unfolding. The terminal slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of announcements, rolling luggage, and hurried footsteps. But for her, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The confrontation, once a sharp and personal humiliation, had rippled outward, touching lives she could never have anticipated. Phones had captured her words, social media amplified her defiance, and news outlets began to report the incident. What had been intended as an attempt to belittle, mock, and diminish her voice had instead transformed into a powerful moment of accountability and awareness. Her courage had exposed the fragility of cruelty when faced with dignity and preparation. Her $850 million travel group became more than just a symbol of business success. It now served as a symbol of resilience, leadership, and a steadfast refusal to accept silence. Employees rallied, clients voiced their support, and communities across the globe saw in her story a reflection of the challenges many face daily: prejudice, cloaked in civility, discrimination hidden in routine interactions, and the subtle acts of exclusion that can accumulate into profound injustice. In offices, boardrooms, and homes, her experience sparked conversations. People questioned the norms they had accepted, challenged the biases they had ignored, and began to reflect on how small actions, mocking a voice, dismissing a heritage, could ripple into moments of profound harm. For her personally, the aftermath was a mixture of triumph and introspection. The agent who had ridiculed her accent was held accountable, not through a single act of vengeance, but through the weight of public scrutiny and the undeniable truth of her achievements. Staff members who had witnessed the incident quietly reconsidered their roles and behaviors, while travelers who had once laughed or looked away were left to confront their complicity. Yet she understood that the change wasn't only external, it began within herself. The fear, anger, and humiliation she had felt were not erased but transformed into clarity. She realized that resilience is forged in the crucible of injustice, and that the strength to rise above humiliation is both a personal gift and a responsibility. In the weeks that followed, her routine returned, but now it carried a new rhythm. Mornings were still filled with emails, strategy meetings, and client calls, but every interaction was infused with a renewed sense of purpose. She thought often about the countless individuals who had quietly endured similar indignities, who had faced discrimination without recourse or recognition. For each of them, her victory, modest as it may seem in the grand scheme, became a beacon. She extended her reach, shared her story, provided mentorship, and utilized her platform to elevate voices that had previously received little attention. The power of her experience lay not in retaliation, but in transformation. Humiliation had become advocacy, and injustice had become a call to action. Her family and friends watched with admiration and relief, witnessing someone they knew as determined and capable confront a profound challenge with grace and intelligence. They recognized that what had occurred in the terminal was more than a personal victory. It was an example of courage under pressure, a testament to the idea that dignity is not given but asserted. They marveled at how she had taken what could have been a private, shaming moment and turned it into a public lesson on fairness, respect, and human decency. The impact extended beyond her personal circle. Conversations ignited across workplaces, schools, and social networks about the insidious ways bias operates. Colleagues reflected on their conduct, organizations revisited policies, and individuals reconsidered how they treated strangers in everyday situations. It became clear that painful moments like hers could serve as catalysts for broader societal reflection. By refusing to accept ridicule, she demonstrated that standing up for oneself is both necessary and transformative, creating ripples that can influence cultures, communities, and institutions. Despite the public attention and validation, she maintained a quiet humility. She understood that true change is ongoing and cumulative. One confrontation cannot eradicate prejudice, but it can inspire awareness, spark dialogue, and remind people of the power of accountability. Her victory was a reminder that courage is not always loud or theatrical. It can be deliberate, calculated, and deeply human. She infused the lessons learned into every decision she made afterward, including how she treated her team, engaged with clients, and shared her story. From that terminal, the cost of inaction, the significance of voice, and the enduring impact of resilience. Months later, she reflected on the journey, realizing that the humiliation she had endured, though intense, had catalyzed growth she could not have anticipated. She had faced the cruelty of prejudice head-on and emerged with her dignity intact, her influence magnified, and her purpose sharpened. She knew that her actions had set an example, not merely for those who watched that day, but for anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or mocked. The lesson was clear. Injustice, when met with courage and clarity, can become a force for empowerment. And yet the most profound change was internal. She carried forward a deeper understanding of herself, her capacity for patience under pressure, her ability to transform anger into strategic action, and her commitment to turning adversity into advocacy. The airport, the agent, the laughter. They were no longer sources of pain, but markers of the moment when her resolve crystallized, when her identity and achievements could no longer be undermined by ignorance or cruelty. She emerged not only as a successful businesswoman, but also as a symbol of dignity, persistence, and the transformative power of self-respect. Her story concluded with a reflection that would linger long after the terminal emptied. The world may attempt to define your worth, to mock your voice, or diminish your accomplishments, but the power to reclaim authority, demand respect, and transform humiliation into opportunity lies within you. Prejudice reveals itself, but so too does courage. The question remains for everyone who witnesses injustice: what will you do when the world underestimates you? And more importantly, what will you do to ensure your voice, your truth, cannot be silenced? In the end, the victory was both personal and universal. She had reclaimed her dignity, fortified her influence, and illuminated the path for others to stand against discrimination. The humiliation that had threatened to define her became the very moment that defined her strength, proving that courage, when exercised decisively, has the power to transform lives and challenge entrenched injustice. And so, as she continued to navigate her life and business, she carried the story not as a scar but as a testament, a living reminder that even in the face of cruelty, resilience, clarity, and courage can turn humiliation into triumph, mockery into revelation, and prejudice into a catalyst for enduring change. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this video. Thank you.